And then, I guess, I'm just going to go back to the old routine when I used to do this. Get ready. How? Anybody here have jobs they're looking to hire somebody for? Great. Anybody want to talk about them? Okay. Yeah, you get to go first, right? As one of the sponsors.
My name is Malia. I work for Dev9. We are one of the sponsors for video teaching. Dev9 is a consulting firm. We hire full-time roles. We focus on continuous delivery, so software field. And I'm always looking for good Java developers, pretty much any level. So if you're interested, let me know. I'll stay for the whole thing, so catch me up.
Cool. Thank you, Willie. Who else? Back here we have.
I'm Sebastian. I'm with GE. GE Digital IP upstairs, so it's kind of easy to do here. And in regards to like the specific things that we're recruiting for, that's I can share that right here. But we are looking for people of all different skill sets. And very interested in learning more about what GE is doing, because when you think of that, GE is more like an industrial company. Now it's like a digital industrial company. So if you want to learn how we've been changing, let's chat with it.
Commercials?
Yes. Yes, I hope you find the hilarious as well.
Super good, thank you.
See, Trevor, you had your hand up, right?
Yeah, yeah.
And then,
Hey, I'm Trevor. I work for Comcast, and we're hiring like gangbusters. We have an office down on 2nd and Spring, and we do nothing but online video distribution, online video management. If you're interested in that stuff, we're a full Java stack, doing lots of really cool backend stuff, and we need lots of Java devs. So if you're interested in video and all the difficulty that video has, come see me.
So I'm the obligatory double down person. So we'll sponsor all this great food eventually. So, anyways, we are online casino game. You put like the casino games. You go to a casino to play. We put them online so anyone can play them for free. So we're looking for Java devs, Scala devs. We're even looking at Clojure, so it's going to be interesting to hear about that. So we don't have any Clojure projects, but if you were dying to work on Clojure, we probably could agree. So pretty much anybody, Java, and we also have some Node as well.
cool, thank you. Anybody else? No. Okay. So we usually see there's the what's the book study group meetings, right? And you guys are currently studying what? Go. And when's the next meeting?
Yeah. And we're currently on chapter 10.
I'm surprised we don't have anybody speaking about Go today.
It doesn't work in JVM.
And actually, I asked Rob explicitly about doing that. And he
Probably
said,
back, right?
no, Go is completely incompatible with JVM. Just an abstract stack. How can it be completely incompatible?
Yeah.
By design.
Oh.
By design.
By design.
Yeah.
Think about it.
Yeah.
Wants it.
Rob is definitely not a grumpy guy at all.
What group is this?
Wingding. It's a reading group. It's mailing to SeaJUG. You're on SeaJUG. Balkan sends out an email every time we have a meeting, so you can learn about it. It's just a
Great way to, that's a great way to keep up on.
All kinds of observations.
yeah. It's a slow reading of a book over the course of
Usually basically 2 chapters.
that's right.
And how much beer in that time?
But
That's your problem.
That's right.
That's right.
No, we have to go through a whole chapter without beer.
And are there any other events or announcements anybody wants to make?
I'll make an announcement.
Go ahead.
Never been to this group before or anything, but I'm here from Minnesota and I'm trying to escape the winter. And so I'm a Java developer. Work for Optum, really big company, working on lots of So if anyone wants to hire me, I will leave Minnesota ASAP.
Just be warned, it's not always like this. Ask all the California transplants.
So true.
All right. Okay, so since I haven't been to a meeting in a while, is there anything I'm missing in this lead up here, getting us started? Anybody? Go ahead. Wi-Fi information?
Oh, yeah. 5G. The Heinz conference.
Wi-Fi name. Heinz Conference 5G.
Oh, it's actually on a plaque.
Yeah.
Fancy.
Wow.
Dun-dun-dun. That's the
picture right there. You guys.
It's location secure. You get too far away.
eyesight secure. Like, what?
Okay, so who wants to go first?
I can do it too. Well, rock, paper, scissors for it?
Yeah.
There we go. Let's do rock, paper, scissors for it.
Yeah.
Right? 1, 2, 3, go.
Oh,
Oh, 1, 2, 3, go. 1, 2, 3, go. 1, 2, 3, go. 1, 2, 3, go. 1, 2, 3, go.
that was good.
You see the random number?
Oh, it's so good.
13 hours later.
You guys are all like sweating and covered in pizza, and you're still just doing it.
That's the exact joke.
Yeah.
I would have heard it.
So, Konstantin of Dev 9.
Woo!
Oh. Oh man, it's so
All right, I'm Konstantin Ignatyev. Right now I'm working for Dev 9. I write no Scala code there. And I started working with Scala about 4 years back. And why? Because I got frustrated with Java things. Just, it doesn't feel right. So I have those examples like that door handle that says push. Yes, there's a door, you can open that, but it's wrong. Yeah. Or that tea kettle. Yes, you can pour tea from that. Yes, you can. But it is not what I want to do. So, and I leave associations to this device to your imagination. Okay, so I was interested in Groovy a little bit, but then I read that creator of the Groovy said that if he read the book by Martin Adersky, the inventor of Scala, that he wouldn't invent that language. That settled that for me. So probably there is something. So that's how I got started. And if you do not recognize those images, I highly recommend this book by Donald Norman that it talks about those things we usually don't pay much attention at, but they actually make our life either miserable or great. So I was looking for something that will make my developer's life great. Enter Scala. So Scala has very big problem, and that problem is community. There are so many folks from academia, and they're pushing for high-end Scala features, and they kind of snobbish. So they say, oh, you know, you shouldn't do that. It's stupid, and create some wonderful example of high-end language constructs that is really, really beautiful, but absolutely cryptic and brain damaging in the beginning. So, my talk is about pragmatic aspect of Scala. So Scala can be most certainly used as Java triple plus. So it can be very great language for the beginners. For example, after a while, after working with Scala for a while, I started to notice that many languages, and Java in particular, they're written in a way that makes it easier to write a compiler for the language. They don't make it easier for me to express what I want to express. And so I discovered, actually, by accident, that Java has really strange things. This example. Do you know you can override a field on a subclass with the field with the same name but completely different type? You cannot do that with a method, but with a field? Sure, help yourself. That was a very strange bug in the code I was working with. And by the way, by the casting that subclass B to A, we can get to the other thing that has the same name but completely different type. Crazy. So Scala will not even compile that. So one of the advantages of the Scala to me is that it helps me to write correct code without spending too much effort. Sometimes in Java, I have to do extra work to make sure my code is correct, to avoid null pointer exceptions. In Scala, I just cannot get them. I mean, I can, but I have to work hard to get the NPE. It's completely opposite to Java, where I can get NPE out of nowhere. Especially with those boxings, unboxings. Suddenly the code that just couldn't produce NPE produces that. Fun, fun, fun. So, I started back then and was interested in those pragmatic aspects of Scala. And I compiled the things, you know. How to start using Scala in your projects and experiment, and don't eat the whole elephant. You know, the SBT, just stay away from that thing unless you want to get the I don't know, PhD in SBT maintenance. So, you know, everybody says something about monads. Just la 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 la. So, just start writing Scala code. It's very easy to set up Maven to compile Scala, so you can mix and match both languages in the same project. And that's how I started with Scala. I use Scala as a glue language to drive Java libraries. I know the libraries are good. They kind of been working for years and relatively bugs-free, but my glue layer, where I want to express my ideas about design of a particular system, in Java look very obscure. So that's kind of my little advice. But once you get comfortable, do not ignore those monads. They're actually useful. So what Scala can give you and gave me right away, really usable string class. Okay, you know, see, I do not recommend creating a SQL like this, but you can see that with the triple quote, my string can span multiple lines of my source and can be very readable. It can automatically recognize my variables in the scope by prefixing the triple or double quote string with the S. The language will interpret that string and do the expansion. And works really well with regex and do very interesting things with regex. You see it on line 35. It automatically recognizes the patterns and assign values to my variables. Year, month, day. It doesn't seem like much, but it reduces the number of lines of code I need to write. So it makes code very transparent. So the pragmatic aspects of Scala make it possible for me to write almost natural language without using any high-end Scala things, but it still feels like normal language constructs. Yes.
Is the .r on the previous page, is that the implicit function?
.r?
That tells them.
Yes. Yes. That's regex. So some of my examples will be about badminton courts. So for people not familiar with the game, imagine a huge hole the size of a Walmart or a big store, divided by 10 or more smaller areas called courts, and people play very intense games there. It might be a doubles game, might be a singles game, or court might be idle, or court might be reserved for maybe some training or whatever purposes. So Scala does a wonderful job helping with writing code that is relatively bug-free by design. And one of the things is taking care of the state. And in Java, Java clone, it's a strange beast, right? So Scala has built-in support for state maintenance. So we can create stateful things and explicitly say this will be a variable and this will be a value, and compiler will check that no reassignments happening to this particular thing. And in the beginning I was using vars, but then IDE was keep nagging me that why are you using var? It's actually a value. Yeah. So yeah, I specifically declare them as a vars to say even by default they are values. They can be declared as vars and case classes. So the case class, I put that in 4 lines, but actually this is the complete Java bean. It's a class declaration with all those getters and setters and whole bunch of other niceties. So down below, it's not a copy constructor, but the copy without parameters will create a copy of the state, or I can overwrite one particular or several fields as I copy. In this particular case, well, I want to change the port number and anything else, everything else will be the same. Little things, but again, they make code way more transparent to my taste. And by the way, I can declare. So here you can see that, you know, in Java that would be probably 2 screens of code to declare that port. Here it's 4 lines. And it would be silly to have, you know, files with the 4 or 1 liners. So the Scala allows as many classes to be declared in the same file as you need. But
So, Konstantin, before you do that, if you didn't want ID to be allowed to be overridden and instructed, how complicated would it be to change that? I mean, it's an optional. You've got a default value, the ID. If you said no, it should always be this UUID. How difficult would that be to specify?
oh, if I
You say it must.
if I will not provide the default value, I will not be able to construct it without providing.
Other way around. If you wanted it to be always set to this random UID and not be allowed to be overridden.
I'll put that in a superclass and hide it.
Okay, so you have to have another class to do that.
Yeah.
Okay.
I think your case class can also have a body with private state. I'm not sure.
Maybe. Again, I don't claim to be the expert in all things Scala. I'm using that as pretty much Java triple plus and just sharing why I started and what keeps me going, keeps me interested in Scala and why I'm still using that. It's probably a very dense thing, but what I'm trying to show on this slide that the code is more readable. It's left to right. You know, it's not like sudden jumps. I need to declare the type, but actually type comes way later. Or when I need to say, well, I want to do this and then that and then something else, then Java collections, Scala collections, they facilitate that. That's actually not collections, that's just those monads, and the Lowe's monads, they facilitate that, but the manifestation of that is that I can specify in the code exactly what I want to happen sequentially. So sometimes in Java, when oh my God, I need to do something else. So I need to wrap my thing and put that kind of in front. Here I can put it later, so it's more natural way of expressing what's going on. Also, on the line 23, you can see a very interesting beast. It's called partially applied function. Anybody knows what it is? Very few folks. Basically, partially applied function is the function that declares where it can run, like a division, for example. We cannot divide by 0, so a function of division is undefined for the parameter of 0. So the partially applied functions are functions which can be declared in a way that they tell the language and infrastructure where they can be applied. Yes?
Small correction, I think you mean partial function. Partially applied function
Yeah,
would be.
that's correct.
If you've got curly things in your.
Yeah, it's partial function. Yeah, it's currying. Yeah, that's correct. So anyway, so This thing works with ports, but it is declared for the case when a port can be in idle state. So it will work only for idle state. Anything else will be ignored. And functions, I don't know why mouse pointer is not working. So we can declare the function in place, or we can use function declared someplace and use it everywhere. It's actually for very compact and easy to reason about the code, and that's what I value there. So I hate using debugger, so I prefer code I can reason about, and when I see the bug, I can look at the code, and if I cannot reason about that code and I have to use debugger, that means it's a bad code and need to be rewritten. So Scala, in moderation, allows me to write that code. In moderation is a key word here. Can be crazy. On my tips, I said don't go crazy with implicits. That will make very interesting code. Switch on steroids. Switch just in Java, that just makes me crazy. Why on those switch statements I cannot use fully qualified enum? Why? But in Scala, anything can be used for the pattern matching by classes, by partial states, and it does a wonderful job of extracting values out of the things matching a particular pattern. So you can see here, so this is the switch statement in Scala that says we'll go over that mixed list of things, and you see it has badminton courts and strings and numbers. And this switch says, well, in case if it's a badminton court and I don't care what the court number is, as long as it's idle, I will print this thing and I'll print the court number. For anything else, I will just say BC dash a court number, and then anything else that's underscore means basically wildcard. I will just print the simple name of the class, and you can see the result is the list. We map every value in the original list to a new value. We did basically a transformation. And it's working. So it makes, again, code very compact and easy to reason about, and I would say reduces the number of bugs. For comprehension, another nice thing, it's basically says Scala has a good academic foundation, so everything kind of matches together pretty nice, I would say. So Java got optional thing, but it just doesn't feel right. It's a little bit of improvement over using the null values, but not much. Not so in Scala. So there's an option, and that for expression in 27, it will extract the value out of the maybe person and the maybe role, and if both of them are extractable, so the options do contain the values, then only in this case we get into that internal body and do something. Otherwise, we do something else. Again, it makes for a very compact code. Yes, Jason?
The time check.
Okay. All right. So Scala is a statically typed language, but it feels like a dynamically typed language. And see here, I can declare a string and assign it to date and back. But it's very controlled. We can do that in a JavaScript, right? But it's something it's doing there. Here it's very much controllable. And it's done with the not so secret source of implicits. And IDE usually does the decent job pointing that here we use the implicit. And again, this thing should be used in moderation. I mean, it makes code really, really clean and nice. For example, we can say, okay, I have a person and I can assign, let's say, HTTP request to a person through the implicit that will extract all the necessary values. It makes for really, really clean code. Really hard to understand if you forgot what you were thinking like 2 months ago. But it's a very powerful tool. And again, there is no magic. It's very strictly controlled. If there are two implicits and there's any ambiguity, a compiler will just refuse to do that. Say no. Also, the famous saying in a Ruby land, if it's walks like a duck, walks like a duck, it's a duck. In Scala, has a very nice statically typed definition. What do I mean if it walks like a duck? In this case, it declares that the function do and close takes something that is that has method close declared. So it doesn't have to implement interface closable. It just has to have a function close that takes no parameters. And we can do work, and if it implements that, we can call this method. And we can do sort of a reflection kind of a reflection to that. We can say, well, I know this thing has this method. So I cast that to inline definition of that closable thing. That's something that has a close method. And I can call this method. What else? Scala can be used as a scripting language for shell or as an embedded language. So here's the little example of the shell script, so to speak. It's called from the command line, calls into ls, and then pipes the results to the process logger, where I can do whatever I need to do with that.
Does it have issues with startup time because of the JVM?
Of course. So it's not for speed. It's just I personally wrote those things to generate the shell scripts because it was much easier and way more compact definition of the thing I want to accomplish in Scala than I would write in Perl or Shell. And there's of course REPL. And this thing is actually a reference to the earlier talk by Mr. Pearson. He was talking about the tricks he need to play in Java to say, well, actually, when I have a string, there are different strings. They cannot be, combined. One is the ID of the account, and another is ID of the person. So Scala has a value types. So they don't have a memory overhead. So it's still a string down below, but interesting things can be expressed. So I can, combine meters and feet and get the proper measurement and the distance. And of course, it's a very simplistic example. John Nestor has a very good library that implements, proper manipulation with the different types. And he gave a talk at the Scala user group 2 months ago. Anyway, that's another helper. That's basically it.
Anybody got any quick questions?
What are the downsides, if any?
Downsides. Compiler is very complex, and compilation times in Scala longer than in Java. So it's advisable to have a nail gun a compilation server have running in a background, and Maven will just delegate to that. Then it gives a decent speed. I would say in a average size project, it's not an issue with modern machines. But that's yes.
IntelliJ is a very good Scala plugin.
Yes.
So you can develop it. Debug, if you happen to do that, compilation times would be fast.
Right, but I don't trust IDEs. I want my project to be compilable and maintainable on the build servers down there. So yes, I enjoy the IntelliJ support, but build is different.
Yeah, but the beautiful thing about IntelliJ is it understands Maven really well. Right?
Yeah.
So if you're a Maven user.
I was going to ask, when it comes to really complex, long algorithms, since you said it can take longer, is the big O in terms of complexity and how long it takes, does it get to be pretty crazy compared to Java, or how bad is it once it starts to get up to those size of algorithms?
No, I was talking about compilation speed, not the runtime speed. The runtime speed is on par with Java and sometimes better, sometimes slower.
Okay, cool.
It's just development, kind of wait time till it completes.
Okay.
I would just add to that, I mean, with things like with collections, Scala is a hybrid language. You might use an immutable, you might be using an immutable map.
Yeah.
And then you might at some point decide for performance reasons to switch to the mutable map.
Yeah.
And it has both of them.
So it's that easy to switch between two. Yeah.
And it has built-in parallel collections, so you are not worried about the order of operations. You can use parallel collections, and then it will do those maps and reduce operations on multiple threads.
Okay.
Yes.
I don't know if this is a question for you, if you're using this in production, or if anybody else even, but I am curious, when you're working with much larger applications, you're trying to apply something like an automation scheme to either for testing or integrated deployment. You talked about that the compilation time is going to affect even if you offload it. So if you have a rather large application that's bringing stuff from all kinds of places in an automated process, do you see a dramatic increase in the time required and the rapidity of, okay, I fixed something, I'm running something, and recompile, and doing it in an automated fashion? Does that change much?
Not much. I've seen Java projects that the build time is all the tests, and especially when tests are initializing same thing over and over and over again, way longer than Scala. So overhead, it's bigger compiler-wise, but it's not a deal breaker, I would say.
All right.
Thank you. Scala also with the new
Maybe, but I attended speak by the what is his name, the guy who was hating to the compiler, and he left the company because they didn't want to rewrite the compiler the way he wanted. If they did, it would be a wonderful thing because his ideas were about partial compiler that would work of the increments, pretty much like Git works. So it would understand the whole code base and understand implications of everything. So for now, I'm just buying the fastest CPU possible, and that's actually usually for $1,000 or $2,000 I can mitigate all the slowness.
Okay, thank you very much. I'll make sure we have enough time for everybody, and then maybe a discussion at the end here too.
Yeah, sure.
All right. Trevor of Comcast on JRuby. That's you.
Hey everybody.
Oh, hey, Trevor.
I'm Trevor. What's up? Do. All right. Ready for this? Here we go. Hey, JRuby. It's just Ruby on the JVM. All right. How many people here know what Ruby is? Cool. Not everybody. How many of you guys have heard of JRuby before? That's cool. Yeah, JRuby's cool. So let me introduce myself first. My name is Trevor Lalish-Menagh. In haiku form, I was once a sysadmin, then a Ruby on Rails dev, now a Java guy. So, right. So for you that did not raise your hand when I asked what Ruby is, let me explain what Ruby is.
Oh my God.
Ruby is a interpreted language. So unlike Java, Java's compiled, Ruby's interpreted. It was developed, created the same year Java was created, 1995. It's been around for 20 years. A great language out of Japan. The guy that created the language is still working on it. His name is Maz. And he came from Perl and Python and said, I really want a language that makes me happy. So Ruby is often talked about as a language that is optimized for developer happiness. And that's something that it has from the beginning, been what it's all about. So JRuby is Ruby on the JVM. I think it was 1999. Charles Nutter, who's the guy that's the main lead force, headiest in the JRuby community. He said, "You know what? I love Ruby, and I'm a Java guy, but Ruby had a lot of downsides, and he really wanted to say, okay, I want to get this thing that is Ruby, this great interpreted language that I love, and put it on the JVM." And that work started in '99, and it's very mature at this point. JRuby 9000, which is the latest version, is fully compatible with the regular what's called MRI Ruby 2.2, which is the latest and greatest out there. And not only is it completely compatible, or almost completely compatible with Ruby, CRuby, it's considerably faster than CRuby as well. So that's one of the nice advantages of going onto the JVM if you're a Ruby dev. You can also integrate,
So did JRuby introduce threading ideas?
Yes. So that's the question is, did JRuby introduce threading ideas to Ruby? So that's a great question. MRI does threading, sort of cheats. It's single core, and threading is kind of goofy. one of the things that you get with JRuby is we leverage actual threads through the JVM. So there are threads and something called fabrics, which is like a thread in Ruby. If you run that in MRI, you're going to have, or CRuby, you're going to have an approximation of real thread. But in JRuby, you get true multi-threading. It's so much nicer. That's actually one of the biggest points of the speed up between Ruby and JRuby is that you get multi-threading for free because JVM is good.
How do they handle shared state then? Without using the Java language concepts?
That's a good question. I'm not entirely sure how shared state is dealt with differently between JRuby and core Ruby. But good question.
So is it based on my Java threads then? Or?
Behind the scenes, they are Java threads.
Okay.
So
So not system threads that are.
Oh no.
Okay.
So like in MRI,
Yeah.
when you do thread.new, it's actually spinning up a separate process, separate Unix process or Windows process, whatever. You know, it's whatever your machine does as a separate process.
Yeah.
And in Ruby, it's creating, or in JRuby, it's creating a Java thread. So one of the Nutter has a great slide on this in one of his JRuby talks. But when you spin up 20 different Ruby threads, it spins up 20 different processes on your machine, and that's bonkers. But in JRuby, it doesn't spin up 20 JVMs. That would be stupid. It creates 20 threads. So it's like, you know, it's such a much like the Java thread model is a much more natural fit to how Ruby threads and Ruby fabrics work.
Makes sense. Thanks.
The one thing you can't do, coincidentally because of that, is fork does not work. So Ruby has fork built in. Fork, if you're unfamiliar with it, is a way to crack off a process, an actual process, and do something else, just like a Unix fork. Well, you can't crack off a process if you're in the JVM. So that's one of the rare parts of JRuby that is not compatible with MRI.
Like old school C.
Oh yeah. Although with FFI, we get around a lot of the C hooks, which is kind of nice.
That's good.
Yeah. All right. So here's some sample code. I'll run this later so you can see that it works. It is unbelievably unexciting. This is some basic swing code. Oh yeah, swing, right? Remember swing?
You're bringing it back.
Yeah, going old school right here. But this is like Hello Spring, or actually Hello Swing in JRuby. It's just creating some stuff .new. It looks really similar to what you do in Java, except that there's slightly less code.
Yeah.
Which is nice.
So with JRuby, then you can actually incorporate a lot of Java libraries within the
Yes.
Oh,
Yeah. So like that's another huge advantage of JRuby. Not only is it just Ruby, but it's just Ruby, and you can pull in your favorite Java libraries. Like we just got that for free. You got Swing is in every Java. If you pulled in, so we use this at work actually, and not Swing. Oh god. But we use JRuby at work, and this works just fine with Maven. So JRuby pulls in my Maven dependencies, and I have access to all of my other libraries that are really nice.
What's your success rate pulling in your favorite Ruby libraries?
Oh, that's a good question. Actually, very successful. I should caveat, it depends. Some of my favorite ones, like Nokogiri is an XML and JSON parsing library that I love. It's really good and really intuitive in Ruby. There's a Java equivalent of it. Most Ruby libraries that you use work quite naturally with JRuby. The kicker is if you have a Ruby library that's calling out to some C extensions, which happens, but less and less so these days. I think a lot of folks are not calling out to C libraries nearly as much.
I was gonna wait until the end, but I know I'm gonna forget this question now.
Go for it.
Yeah. So, when you were saying earlier that it has issues with forking, is that because Java 7 had forking, so it's fork and join. So,
Oh,
is
fascinating.
there
Wow.
like a reason why it doesn't work, or like they just haven't adjusted it to?
They probably just haven't adjusted it. Yeah.
Okay.
I know as of right now, Ruby's fork does not work in that. But then again, I don't think I've ever written like production code that forks.
Does it take on capabilities like delegates or pointers or?
Oh, you mean can you? No, I mean that's all lower level. That it's hidden away for you.
Okay.
You're interested in the main reason why I asked is
Yeah.
you start working with stuff like Storm or something,
Oh,
where
totally.
you do distributed processing.
Yeah.
That comes up more than just you're like.
Oh,
the big
yeah,
problem with
totally.
Writing a web app versus I have to take this process.
You have to actually crack this process up and go.
Yeah, yeah. So
Yeah, that's a good question. I actually don't know. We I know it's an outstanding issue right now. I don't know if there's plans
I would
to have
imagine
parity
they'll get to
moving
it
forward. Totally.
The Java 7 fork join stuff doesn't actually fork the process.
It doesn't fork a process. Oh no. Well,
Fork doesn't fork.
that might be
It still
yeah.
applies to the it's a different kind of fork.
So
Same thing.
Yeah.
Just a confusion.
there has been great debate with JRuby and fork over the years because it's been like the one missing piece that is hard to do inside the JVM for obvious reasons. Yeah. All right. So why should you care about this? Well, a couple reasons why you should care about this. You can write less code to do the same work. For a lot of things that you're working on, you really straightforward business logic, web apps, which I'll get to in a little bit. You can write a little bit of Ruby code and get a lot out of that instead of writing a bunch of Java code like this. You write a little bit of Ruby code like this. It's much more readable. We talked about readability in Scala. You get some readability with Java or Ruby too. And this is the big selling point. This is like my biggest selling point with Ruby and JRuby, but Ruby in general. There's a low barrier to entry. Ruby is very, very beginner friendly. I love it for that. You can go from writing scripts to going into doing really complicated stuff. It has this like long tail of learning where you can start off really simple and you can pick it up like that. I used to teach these Rails Bridge classes when I lived in Philadelphia, where we take people and go from 0 to having a fully functional web app within the course of a day. And it's something that you could grok, you could totally understand, and I love that. I can spin stuff up fast. I'm a big fan of lowering the barrier to entry to programming in general. And I think Ruby has done that very, very well. Another thing is JRuby on Rails. Who here knows what Rails is? So yeah, most of them. Right? Ruby on Rails is it's a web framework, a rather popular web framework. A lot of web frameworks have based themselves off of Ruby on Rails. This is in the mid 2000s one of the things that launched Ruby into the minds of a lot of American developers. Before Ruby on Rails came along, it was more of a fringe Japanese-only kind of language, and then DHH came along and wrote Rails and gave it to the world. People are like, "Oh, I can do what really fast?" And so, sorry how fast you can get a web page up. But so this is all the commands you need to do to get an app that looks like this. So there's no code here. This is all command line stuff. I'll do this later to show you, so you can believe I'm not lying. But with a couple commands, you can type, and poof, I have a simple web page up. Now you could argue you could do this in Spring Boot. There is famously a tweet where someone did a simple web server in Spring Boot, which is awesome, but this is really neat. We actually use Rails with JRuby at work for some simple 1 or 2 page apps that don't get a ton of traffic. One of the nice things was we were able to spin up the application really fast, tweak it, modify it, get it out in production without a lot of rigmarole. And the learning curve, again, was very low to get people started. I got people going from 0 to working on this pretty fast. One of the nice things about having that on the JVM is that I was then able to take this thing that I could spin up really fast and get going, bundle it up, and put it out on our production servers with something called Warbler. So Warbler is this JRuby gem. A gem is what the Ruby community called packages or libraries. So it's this JRuby library where you can just type a command called warble in a directory with some Ruby code, and I'll take that Ruby code and turn it into a jar or a war. So if you're writing a Rails app and you have Warbler installed, you can type warble, and it takes your Rails app, turns it into a war. You can take that war and drop it in your Tomcat web application server or a Jetty application server or whatever your choice is, and it just works like any other war. So that's actually super useful. We use this in production today. Works great. Another, oh yeah.
When you do that, is it still interpreting the code, or is it actually converting it to Java, compiling that code, and then putting it out the wall?
Actually, that's a great question. So when using, the question is like when you're using Warbler, does it pre-compile the code, compile the code, or does it still interpret it? And the answer is yes. You can do it either way. So by default, Warbler will package up all your Ruby code straight up and run it interpreted. As you might guess, interpreted code runs slower than compiled code. I'll show some numbers later on. But unsurprisingly, interpreted code is not going to run as fast. You don't want to use this stuff for your super mega high performant, must run really fast now things. You do it for stuff that you need to do quick. Doesn't need to be necessarily fast, but you need to get up really fast. You need to iterate quickly. So, but you can compile it, which does increase the speed. It doesn't get you Java native speeds, runtime speeds, but still gets you pretty close there. One of the other neat things about running this, working in JRuby, is that you get fast iteration times on development. So if I'm writing a Rails app, I can run in regular Ruby, which has much faster interpretation times locally, and things just work. And then I can go into JRuby, create that war, drop it in, instead of having to be in the JVM and wait for compile or wait for interpretation. It's kind of nice. From the other point of view, one of the things that and this is more for Ruby devs, but you get JMX. I don't know how excited you are about this, but I'm really excited about this. JMX gives you it's one of the best parts of the JVM. I love the monitoring that you have built in with the JVM, and it's something that the Ruby community just is missing, straight up missing. So with the simple library, there's a library called, surprisingly, JMX, that lets you add amines to your Rails apps or to any Ruby runtime, and poof, now you have nice monitoring that you can do alerts on and tie into your existing infrastructure. So that's pretty nice, in my opinion. All right, so now I'm going to do live demo, which is horrible. This is not, don't do this when you're presenting. Just don't. It's going to be bad, guys. Just let you know. All right, here we go. So first, I think I'll demo a Rails app. If you haven't seen a Rails app before, you're gonna see a Rails app now. So yay! All right, I created one before, but let's create another one. So we'll do JRuby here. I'll show you what. Okay, here we are. JRuby 9050, right? So JRuby -S Rails new cool stuff. So what this is going to do is it's going to auto-gen a Rails application. Creates all these files for you. Super cool. You can look into them later. It doesn't matter. But it preps everything for you and gets you all ready to go. It sort of bootstraps you. So now we're bootstrapped, and you see we have a cool stuff directory down there at the bottom. I'm going to cd in the cool stuff. I have my files in here. And let's see, why don't I'm going to run this command called Rails generate scaffold. And what this is going to do, all right, let me just type it out. So JRuby -capital S. Capital S says interpret whatever I do next. Rails generate scaffold. And I'm going to create something called a post. And it's going to have a title, which is a string. And it's going to have a body, which is going to be a blob of text. All right. And what this is going to do is it's going to generate a model, a view, controller, some database, we call it database migration scripts. Everything I need to have a post that has the title and a button. All right, great. So it comes built in with the in-memory database. So let's initialize the in-memory database. So JRuby -S Rails or rake. Rake is just like make, but for Ruby. That's why it has an R. Rake db migrate. So we're going to migrate our database. db migrate.
Migrate.
Oh, did I spell it wrong? That's why you don't. Trust me, guys. Just don't do it. Just don't. Especially if you can't spell very well. Always a mistake.
Autocorrect.
Oh my God! Wouldn't that be awesome?
Now we're not going to get the message when you start the server.
That's right. So yeah, boom. Now we have a row created with some posts. So now we can just start our server.
Cool.
JRuby -S Rails server. And again, this is every time I'm typing JRuby, it's spinning up a JVM, loading the JRuby interpreter, and running this command in. So this is running Java on my compy, and it says go to port 3000 on localhost. Okay, got it. So if I go to port 3000 on my localhost, you get this goofy welcome aboard page. But I also have posts. Oh. Someone said, oh, that's right. And what this is doing, you can see all these commands running. It's like, oh, select some stuff from some things. And now I have a list of posts. I don't have any posts. Let's create one. Yo. Gabba. Boom. So now I have a post with a title and a body. Voila. Yay. Easy peasy. So this was pretty simple to get started. And this is a baseline. I mean, it's super, does nothing, right? But now you have a web app that's just working. I didn't have to write any code so far to get this far. This is pretty nice. All running on Java, of course. I had other live demo-ish things I was going to show off about how to turn it into a war and do that other stuff, but it runs long and you don't want to see all that stuff. It's neat though. Warbler's kind of cool. Yeah.
You can wait until I'm sorry, I didn't mean to cut you off.
No,
I
cut
am
me off.
curious just because no one's speaking about it today. I haven't used this, but I've used Ruby and I've used Groovy. So I wonder when you're comparing and contrasting Groovy versus Ruby, JRuby, and like the whys of why you choose say I want to keep it one way or another when they have a lot of the same benefits. If you have thoughts about that, I would be interested. Because when people try to compare and contrast them online, it's sort of like, well, never mind.
Great question, client to the audience. Awesome. Oh, it's like it was planned. Beautiful. Yeah, why not Groovy? So how many people here have heard of Groovy with a G? Yeah, you have. Yeah, Groovy as well. Yeah, why not Groovy? I mean, there's Ruby, and JRuby, but Groovy is also if you don't know about it, is also a dynamically typed interpreted language on the JVM. If you can guess by the name, is strongly influenced by Ruby, but is very much its own language. It's not a horrible language. We use it every day at work. This is the scripting language of record for our customers when our customers write scripts to work with their videos. They're writing in Ruby. It's a fine language. Ruby has an equivalent to Rails, Grails, which has attained some popularity. They're from a language point of view between Groovy and Ruby and JRuby. I mean, I could argue back and forth, but it's all minutia that really doesn't matter all that much. The big thing I would say is that Groovy is a dynamic language for Java devs. You can cut and paste your Java code into Groovy, just like you can cut and paste your Java code into Scala, and it just works. JRuby is Java for Ruby devs. So if you're really into Ruby and you want it to be fast, you want to get some oomph, you want to get some advantages of Rails, go the JRuby route. It's not Java. Like, Ruby gives you an ease into the language from Java. Now there are some JRuby and Ruby have a much more vibrant developer community than Ruby. Ruby, if you don't know, recently got dropped by Pivotal. They've gotten picked up by Apache. I mean, they're still around. Ruby's not going away anytime soon. We've gotten a lot of really good things out of it. Gradle, for example, is all written in Groovy. Fantastic, potential replacement to Maven. There's lots of good things in the Groovy community. I definitely encourage checking out both these languages. Yeah, JRuby is something I'm a big fan of because I love Ruby, and I think the JVM is pretty cool. So is it fast? Yeah, it's totally fast compared to Ruby. I mean, oh man, look at this. Look at these numbers. That's a small number. That one's big. Oh my god. So, no brainer. JRuby's totally way fast compared to Ruby. Nah, JRuby's slow as dirt. JRuby sucks compared to Java. Yeah. Not surprising. This should not shock anybody. Java's compiled language. JRuby is interpreted. You're going to take a performance hit. No questions asked. So.
I'm curious about JRuby versus Iron Ruby.
Iron Ruby. If you don't know what Iron Ruby is Ruby on the CLR or the .NET, not .NET, .NET universe. I don't know how well maintained Iron Ruby is, honestly. It might be pretty well maintained, but you're kind of looking at apples and oranges too. Iron Ruby is only going to run on Windows. Exactly, Visual Studio. Whereas this guy will run wherever you can do a JVM, which is,
Had it pretty through dire straits for somebody to be like, man, I'm a Ruby developer. I don't know if I can do C#. So I'm gonna make transpiler or something to make it work over there, that's an undertaking.
Oh yeah, no, iRuby's solid. I mean, they mad impressive. I'm almost done.
I was just doing the same thing.
Yeah. So yeah, unsurprisingly, who should use JRuby? Who should use JRuby? That's a good question. You should use JRuby. It's awesome. Ruby is a great language. It'll make you happy. Put a smile on your face. I love it. It's great. It's generally fun to write Ruby code. It's enjoyable to write Java code too. Don't get me wrong. It's my day job and I like it. I like it enough to come.
So if you're a Ruby developer and you just really want to use some of the Java capabilities and have it run on JVM,
Yeah.
you should definitely use JRuby.
Totally. And if you care about speed, because
Yeah.
if you're
Compared to Ruby,
if you're coming from the Ruby world and you want to get the most out of your Ruby applications,
Yeah.
JRuby is definitely the way to go. It's Rubinius, which is Ruby written in Ruby, is making some good strides compared to MRI on speed, but JRuby is definitely the way to go. It's the clear winner.
I don't think this question is going to be on the next slide, so hopefully not. But and I don't even know that necessarily you can speak to it, but what would be interesting when you brought up the Iron Ruby concept, if you were to keep this around and use it for future talks, might be comparing like Ru and Ruby compile times and run times versus that. Because Spring's pushing Ru really hard, but I would be interested.
Whoa. Ru's coming back? I thought
No, they're still
Ru was down the vine.
It is, but they're still pushing.
Oh,
So
come
I'm
on,
curious to
Ru.
see.
Well, I thought that all migrated onto Spring Boot. Spring Boot, I thought was
Does.
going to be Ru 2.0.
It does. It
Yeah.
does. But when you work with some of the tutorials, or if you sit through some of the no club stuff, they still use it for stuff.
Oh.
So I'd
No.
be curious to see.
I know the guy that invented Ru. He's cool, but it's Ru.
I don't disagree with you. I was.
Yeah.
I
I do.
Nothing under defense for Ru.
I do say I like what I'm seeing of Spring Boot.
Yeah.
I think Spring Boot is doing a lot of things right. If you guys haven't checked that out, Spring, the Spring framework is really reinventing itself with Spring Boot. Definitely worth taking a look at. They're really trying hard to get to that point with Rails, and Ru was definitely an attempt to get to that point with Rails as well, where you type, magic just works, right? I really don't think they're there yet, but they're getting close. So yeah, if you're interested in Ruby, which you should be because it's great, check out tryruby.org. 15 minutes out of your life, tryruby.org will get you a gentle and wonderful introduction to the greatness that is Ruby. If you're interested in JRuby, jruby.org/download, you can get started right away. Yeah, that's it for me. Thanks. Oh yeah. A couple questions, yeah.
So I was curious, how they fix the overall, there's a single lock in Ruby or JRuby?
The global interpreter lock, yeah.
Yeah. How they fix that?
In MRI, no. The GIL is still around in CRuby, but JRuby never had it. So they instantly threw away the idea of the global interpreter lock in JRuby. It doesn't exist. That was one of the things that JRuby did from day one. Is say the global interpreter lock doesn't make any sense when you have a truly multi-threaded system like the JVM. So. Yeah, again, that's where one of the main reasons you have the big speed bump. CRuby just can't get rid of the GIL. It's too embedded into the system.
Oh, I was just gonna.
Sorry. He had a question. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you know some idea of the size of communities of Ruby versus JRuby?
Oh, that's a great question. So the JRuby community is really a subset. It's really embedded in the Ruby community. The Ruby community is huge. I mean, in fact, Seattle has a great meetup. Seattle.rb meets every third Tuesday, I think. It's salrb.org up at Substantial. It's a really vibrant community. The JRuby community is a subset of that. There's a core team of about 15 to 20 people led up by Charles Nutter, who really work on JRuby. JRuby is worked on full time. Charles Nutter, the guy that invented it, works for Red Hat, and his entire job is to work on JRuby. So it's nice and very well maintained.
I was just gonna say, just something to note, in, because I came from the Visual Studio world, .NET, 2012, 2013, and in 2015 they abandoned Iron Ruby and Iron Python. You can still get them through the open source community as a way of implementing into it, but it's not supported any longer, natively baked into the newer Visual Studios.
It's sad. It's sad.
What are they telling you to go to?
C#, of course.
Really? So, I mean, if you're a Python programmer and you want to Python on Windows, you're screwed.
Yeah. I mean, now they support Node.
Yeah, but take that with a grain of salt.
It's just saying people who are associated with it.
Right.
How do you decide between an interpretive framework and compile framework like Spring? How do you
how do you decide between an interpretive framework like Ruby on Rails and a compiled one like Spring MVC? That's a great question. I would say that if you were starting from greenfield, total greenfield, wanted to get something up running quickly, Rails is a great way to go. It gives you a lot really fast. Spring MVC, if you're very comfortable with Spring MVC, and you personally can get that up and running really fast, and you're working with developers that can also get that up and running really fast, then you're fine. But one of the things that Spring brings along with it is the burden of domain knowledge. So I must know a lot about Spring to get Spring up and running. I'm a Spring developer, I work in Spring every day, and I still don't know everything about Spring. With Rails, again, it's that low barrier of entry. If I'm doing a new project, I would probably do it in Rails as opposed to Spring MVC.
I mean, but Rails is totally conventional layout. You have no idea where anything is unless you decide to understand Rails ecosystem.
That is a great point. Yeah, you don't know where anything is unless you decide to learn it. The reason it's wonderful, Rails in particular, is that their guides are really wonderful. Their tutorials and guides are, then the support and the community is so just there for you. And Spring, I'll give you this, Spring with Spring Boot, they're working on getting to that point, but traditionally since maybe 2.5 years ago, it really wasn't like that in the Spring world. You really need it.
So heavy.
It is heavy, but
That's making it better. So
That's
the
exactly
scaffolding
right.
and stuff is changing some of that stuff.
yeah,
This
Spring
point
Boot is
earlier,
very promising.
The things I think if someone is doing Java already, it's probably less likely they're going to pick up JRuby as a solution if they're already doing Spring. But it's a good way, as you said, to get the benefits out of it, right?
Yeah.
Like when I started using Ruby a couple years ago, I started teaching it to myself. I think some of the really obscure stuff felt like there was just a lot of magic going on in Ruby. Like it would just make stuff work, and I didn't know how that worked. Or like you connect to a database, and I used to needing something like Hibernate, like an ORM. But Ruby was just like, no, man, I got it. There's like metadata or something.
It's like, I got you.
And I don't know. Do I need to capitalize this letter this way for you to understand what this is? It's like, no, it's cool. Just let it go. And I never really understood how that worked.
But you don't need to, and I think that's the real win for Ruby and Rails.
Yeah.
Is like you don't need to know that stuff. You can learn that stuff. I can show you how the sauce is made, but you don't need to know it.
Kind of like you sometimes do need to know. I mean, I remember running the Rails tutorial, not the JRuby one, and I went through the steps, and it was going great, and I got like 45 steps in, and then I got an error.
Oh, yeah.
And I'm like looking at this error thinking like, that's not what it said in the tutorial that happened now, and I had absolutely no clue how to even begin figuring out what had happened because it generated 15,000 classes, and it's like, well, something's wrong with one of these. I don't know what the hell's meant to be happening now. I don't know anything about what I created. It's like, I think once it breaks, you really do have to understand something.
Oh, absolutely. Absolutely, yeah.
Can we do this?
Yeah.
We're not gonna have time for a round table.
Oh.
Stan's gotta get in there. And Sean and Double Down, thank you very much for the pizza. It's
Yeah,
here.
let's get-
Maybe we can keep chatting while we get some pizza.
Let's do that.
And then,
Yeah. I want some pizza.
Yeah. Yeah, it's sort of getting cold and we're true geeks. We're geeking out.
It's not the purpose of we have to find the. You can unplug my John if you want. I get to find the programming language that solves all the problems. Feel free to unplug all the things. Gotcha.
You can go that way.
Yeah.
There's some more pizza sitting right here if you want to do like 2 lines.
I'm not good. Good on them. I mean, you know, take it's like trying to fulfill the promise of realism. But I think you can
So you put in soda?
Yep.
Oh, nice.
Just
Oh my gosh.
Yeah.
Are you excited to come to meet him?
Yeah, yeah.
That's great.
Yeah, definitely. So it's Mallory, right?
Leah.
Leah. Peter.
Peter.
Yeah.
So, Jeff Dunn
Yeah.
Makes
sense, just to kind of clean up the stuff.
Yes, the whole pipeline of things. Sometimes you just don't know.
yeah, Clojure. The ones that
We'll do that and then we'll say, hey, we also do that.
you only say once you know a list, then you don't need to do anything else. Oh, how was Clojure West?
Whatever,
Yeah.
but all of our Dev 9 is
Yeah.
So is that on an island?
like 5 rounds. Like,
Okay.
Oh, the hobbyist. I mean, I'm not professional. I have a buddy really that founded a company called Clojure. So the worst part about it was finding it was like he told me about 2 years after he founded a company, he was like, never start a company here with Clojure. He told him mistake, you can't find anybody. But not as true anymore, but no. With, but yeah, awesome, good stuff. He's doing IVR stuff.
I work for
Yeah. Yeah.
It's fine. Well, that's well. I just wasn't sure if that was it. On my book. I'm not going to do it until it has the.
I just understand all
All right, I'm going to see
browser.
I'm like, I'm already. I also want more stuff. He's like,
Yeah.
there's more stuff.
That's how I like to.
And like, why not the private jet? I'm like, you have to save something for. Come on.
That's great.
Random. I don't know. I never seen that. I was just
Okay, cool. Yeah, sorry.
All right. Okay, so next up we have Stan Dyck of Quest Diagnostics. All right. On Clojure.
Everybody knows what Clojure is, right? And do I really need to explain? I mean, I can go through further what it is if people are interested, but I didn't really want to do too much of the introductory stuff. Clojure is a Lisp, and that's usually the showstopper right there for most people. My experience is that, and this does not apply to me, but Lisp is something you did in college, and it was interesting, but haven't done it since. Is that true for most people here? You know, I never did Lisp in college either. I came in it late, but so Trevor said earlier that that you don't want to do live demos ever. Well, I got bad news. My talk's nothing but live demo. I'm gonna go for broke here. So, but the thing is that I was thinking about what it is that I like. I really like Clojure a lot, and the reasons are there are the reasons that you can read on the Wikipedia page. It stresses immutability first. Immutability is king in the Clojure land. But for me, the most important reason that I like Clojure a lot is probably the least subjective possible reason there is, and that is it's really fun to do. And for me, I just enjoy programming in it. And I was trying to think of a way to try and get that across. And the thing I came up with was just to show you some programming in it. So I thought I'd pick up a little problem that I've been working on in my spare time, and I would give you a little demonstration of what it's like to do in Clojure. So I'm not doing a code review here, right? I'm not asking for you to grade my code here. It's probably not that great anyway. But I'm doing this a lot for the purposes of demonstrating here too. So there's some things that I wouldn't do ordinarily that I'm going to do here. But the problem that I've picked is one that I came up with about 4 months ago. I had an issue at home where I had a water leak at home and ended up having a very, very large water bill one month. So I decided after paying all that money for my water bill, that I would start keeping track of my meter readings. So I go out I work from home, so I go out every day and read my electric meter, my water meter, and my gas meter. And I started a little spreadsheet, just putting that all in there. Put that in there for a couple of years. I've been doing it since 2011. And after you do 365 readings a day, or 365 readings a year for that many years, your spreadsheet starts to get a little bit slow. If you've never noticed that. So I decided, well, I'll just throw together a little Clojure application to do that for me. And I've got it loaded up here. See that? So what I've got is an application here, and all it is really is a database table. Right? I have a database loaded here. And then I have 3 different meter readings, and this is just the summary view of it all. I'm just showing the last 10 readings. So you see I've got water, gas, and electric, and for each of those I have 5 different fields. An ID value, a type, a date timestamp, and then the value, which is on the 4th column, and then a column for comments if I want to put in a comment there. So the R value thing is the thing I care about. That's the raw reading off the meter. But there's a problem with that. And the problem is that that's not terribly useful information, right? Just the raw reading. What I really care about is what's the difference between the reading on 14th there and the reading on the 8th. What I'd really like to do is I'd like to add a column there that calculates the difference between the reading that I just took and the reading that I last took. And so I mean, I'd encourage you to think for just a little bit about how you do that in your favorite language. Don't think too long, though. I don't have that much time. And then I'm going to show you how to do it in Clojure. So that this is a live application here. I'm running it directly off what's called a REPL, read eval print loop. And Clojure development is done almost entirely in the REPL environment. So what I've done is I've loaded the model of this application into here. And if you can see, I've done a dir of that namespace, and it has 3 functions in it. So there's one called get the latest readings. If I do that, it'll show me the latest readings there. It doesn't render properly on this machine. I'm just going to have to apologize for that now. But, live demo stuff. Right? So there's also another function there called get all readings. And it takes a value. I'm going to just get the gas value. If I do that, sorry about that. So that's all the readings that I have. Now that's a little unwieldy for me. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a value. And I call it gas. Oh, sorry about this. And what I want to do, I want to take the first 20 of those things. So you can see I've done I've defined a variable, and I'm going to take 20 of all of the readings. So if I do, I just list the gas. Now I've got 20 readings instead of 200 or however many it was. Let me just pretty print that so you can see what it looks like. This is going to be difficult. So you can see I have these same five fields. And then the R value is the thing that I care about here. So when you do these kind of, let me first, in Clojure you have 3 different types of structures. There is the map, which is what I'm demonstrating right here. This thing is called a map, so it's a associative array. Key value pairs, so A is a key and 1 is a value. That's what a map looks like. If I want to extract what the value is from that map, I can put in the key name and then the name of the map, and that will return.
Oh, young.
So we do, if I say the key near it and then the name of the map, and that will return the value. So then in Clojure, the main function that you're going to need that does all of the heavy lifting for you is something called map. And that's just like the map you have in Java 8. Map takes a function. So in this case, I'm going to say a function like inc, which is a function that takes a number and returns a number that is the incremented number. And then it also takes a sequence of stuff. So in this case, it's I'm putting in a sequence of numbers 1, 2, 3. And when I do that, it will return a result that is the increment of those 3. So if I combine those 2 things, then I can say a map of the R value, which is the field that I'm pulling out of that list, and then my variable gas, which is what that does is it returns my list of R values. So that's 20 values from the meter. So the next thing you need, whenever you do these programming problems, there's always going to be one little trick that you need to know, right? The trick that, go ahead.
Is gas a materialized list, or is it a live view of the underlying values?
Gas is pulled out of the database. It's been loaded into the REPL and been stored into a variable on the REPL. Does that answer your question? So again, the thing that the trick that you need to know in this case is, now if I was doing this in an imperative sort of style, I would probably have a for loop, and I would take the first thing, and I would get the second thing, and I would start differencing them, and I'd have to move the second thing into the first position, and that's how it would probably work. But in a functional sort of setup, you do not have access to the other things in the list, right? You're only dealing with the thing that you have right now. So in the trick that you need to know about in this case is a function called partition. Now, if I have let me just show you a value of range. If I do a range 10, it gives me a range of numbers. Now, if I do a partition on range 10, partition 3 of range, so this partition function, if I do a 3 on that range 10, it's going to divide that list into lists of three things. Right? So if I do partition 2, it'll divide it up into 2 different things. That's getting closer, right? So I want to be able to get The difference is here that I need to be able to get an offset of just a 1 rather than 2, right? These are all mutually exclusive lists. But what I want is them to overlap by 1s. Electric partition also has another value another parameter that I can add that gives me an offset. So I've got partition 2, 1 for range 10, 01, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3. So it'll divide that thing up into 2 lists of 2. And that's getting pretty close, right? Now all I have to do is take these two things and let's do that with our gas, yeah? Hang on. So here's my list of values, right? So now, all I have to do is I need to just take the differences of all of these things. So how do I do that? I just use another map. And then I have to do some sort of function. Let's just leave that for now. So if you can see that, I'm doing a map. This thing here is called a lambda, or an anonymous function, basically. And I'm going to take a pair, and I'm going to apply the minus function to that pair of that partition. So if I do that, now I've got a list of differences from all of there, right? Makes sense? Now I'm starting to get something that's useful to me, so I'm going to copy that out. And I'm going to actually put it and make a function out of it. I'm going to call it a sequence. And now I've just created a function here called a sequence of delta values. It takes a parameter here called reading, and then it maps this function here, the lambda of the applied minus across that partition. Now what I want to do is reload that.
Oh, do you want that didn't gas? You wanted it to be reading. You're on.
Oh, you're right. Thank you. All right, so now I should be able to write sequence of delta R values. So now I've just created that name function and I've applied my gas thing and returned the same thing right there. So that's cool. Now I can have a function that does that. But when I look at this list, there's a little issue that I see with this. And that's that I've got like a 7, a 1, 2, these are all 1, and then I've got this weird 98 here. What's that? And I've got some other big ones there too. So what's going on with that?
Vacation.
Exactly. So if you take a look at this list, you can see I've got a reading here on 209. Then I've got the next reading is 330. That's the reason right there. there was a period of time where I just not backfilled all of the readings that I did earlier. So I've got this gigantic difference there, and that's not terribly useful, right? So what I really want to do is I want the difference in values over difference of time, right? I want the R value per day or R value per hour or something like that. So what I really want to do, in addition to calculating these differences, I want to calculate these differences too, right? So, but that sounds like sort of the same thing I was just doing. So let's just go ahead and let's say create another one of these things for our date time. So now it's pretty much going to be the same thing, except I've got this thing here. This thing right here, which I don't really see. So I've got two of these things that are essentially the same, right? I've got this lambda function here is applying the negative function or the minus function to the pair. In this case, I've got something that's got to do some subtraction of dates, and they're very similar, right? So, but it doesn't make sense for me to have two of these functions that are doing exactly the same thing. So what I think we're going to do is we're going to find something that dispatches that function. So let's create a map here that says R value, and then we're going to copy this guy out. And we'll create another one, R, and then our little question mark thing. So let's just create a sequence. I'm going to change the name of this thing to a sequence of deltas, and I'm going to parameterize that field name. And then this thing is going to take the field name instead of the. So now all I have to do is find the field name of the diff functions. So now this thing here is going to look up for the function that's up here. We still need that question mark thing. I'm going to get that. Magic. So this is all I'm doing here is I'm taking a library that's called CLJ time. That's just a wraparound Jota. And what it does is it takes the pair, has to reverse them, and then it coerces each value to a date time object, Jota date time object, and then it creates a Jota interval object from that, and then it expresses that in minutes. So it's the same thing. We just got two different functions that both take a pair of things and then calculate the difference between those things. So now I've got this very nice sequence of deltas function. It should work now on now I have to parameterize the name. R value, that's good. And then R duty. See it? I've got something that calculates the minutes between those two things. All right, so now we're getting closer. What we need to do now is we need to take these values here, divide them by these values here. One of the nice things that we have about map is that if I have two sequences instead of just one, so if I have two sequences instead of one, and I apply some function like plus to them, it will take the two first values, apply that function second and third, and return that. So I think what we probably can do here then is map a difference operator, sequence of deltas, So I took a map of the difference operator, or the quotient, or the divide operator, sorry, of the sequence of deltas R value and R to John, and I get a list of ratios. So that's getting to be something that I like too as a function. So I'm going to copy that out and create a function called and I have to change this. Reload that. Same thing. That's good. And I don't like those ratios. I'd like to have that as an actual number, floating point number. So let's do a little bit of fancy lambdas with that. I'm going to create a function, an anonymous function that takes a value and a minutes. And I'm going to divide value and minutes. And then I'm going to multiply it by 60, 24. So I'm going to convert minutes to days. Makes sense. So reverse notation, right? You have minus, you have the multiplier function first, multiplying by 60 and 24 to convert to days.
You had a typo in your minutes.
And you have to tell us about your editor. It's got some unique features.
It looks fine on my end. No, it's my operating system. I think that causes this. So let's see. It's pretty good. Hey, so now we've got big long floats. I don't like that floats. I'd like it to be 2 decimal places instead. So let's go in here and format it. Star 2F is the formatting. But they're all strings. I don't want them to be strings. That's stupid. So let's do one more thing. Let's change that to float. Yay, so I've got a bunch of numbers that are formatted exactly the way I want them. So now the only thing left to do is I want to get that into my original thing here. So let's do in the if you have a map, remember I had this map before. Getting worse. If I want to add a key to a map, I do a function called ASOC. So if I take a map like this, then use this ASOC function to M, add C3 returns. Add thing there. So if I want to add that to my readings here, once again I'm going to use map, and I'm going to have the readings and the units per day. And I'm going to have a function, a reading, and units per day. ASOC to the reading, the key of units per day, and the value of units per day. So remember we had before gas, this thing. Each one of those had 5 fields. Now what we're going to do is we're going to introduce units per day for gas. So now I have, instead of 5 fields, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6. Now I've got these guys in there. So now I've got them added, right? So the only thing left to do is put that guy directly into the function that where that is called, and I also have to add the field here. There it is. Didn't take too long. Sorry about that. Artifact. But that's, I mean, for me, like the playing around aspect of it, the interactivity, the almost playfulness of it is really important and really part of the fun of it. And I got to say that using Emacs is really part of that too. I mean, Emacs is really very much designed to be a Lisp developing machine, and that makes all the difference in terms of like your ability to think what you want to do and then to be able to do it. Really makes a difference. And I know a lot of people that's a showstopper. I'm not going to learn Emacs just to do Clojure. I would say, based on the barrier to entry problem, it's something that I think Clojure has a lot of. It's hard to get started in it, but like I said, it's a lot of fun to do. So, people have questions.
We can do it the other way when you're looking at a bunch of Clojure code that someone else has already written, and you have to break it down to figure out what it's doing. What's the process that you go through with that?
Well, there's tricks to it. Obviously you have to have some knowledge of the idioms of Clojure. There's a certain amount of the way people do things. But there are general things, in Clojure you cannot use something before, you cannot use a function before you define it. So in general you're going to start reading from the bottom of the file and go up to try and see what they're doing. But in a large case, a lot of times what you'll just do is you'll open a REPL, load the namespace, and then just figure out what it's doing by playing around with it. The REPL development is just incredibly, amazingly awesome. And if you're not doing that now, then I can't do Java programming anymore because I don't have a REPL. In fact, oftentimes if I'm pulling down a library, a Java library, I'll just pull it into Clojure in a REPL and just look at it that way. It's far easier for me to do it that way. I think the interoperability with Java and Clojure is really good, and it's not just really good, but it's really well thought out. I think that for instance, in Groovy, you can copy and paste Java code directly into Groovy and have it run, which I don't think is a great idea. It's just in Clojure, what they've done is they've allowed you to do Java interoperability, but it's built into the language in a way that makes sense inside the language. You can't just copy some Java into there. You have to actually use it in the way that Clojure wants you to use it. And I think it's a much better story.
It's a little more safe.
Say again?
It's a little more safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, that ties nicely into my question. I was going to ask, say you weren't going to use that Java wrapper that you had, but you just wanted to use one of the Java 8's datetime classes. What does the syntax look like?
Yeah, the syntax, well, in general, the method calls are placed first in a parenthesis. So you'll do in general, you'll have the method, class, instance actually, and then param. Yeah, so you'll generally, the way it'll work is you'll have some class instance, like a date class, say. And then the method that you want to call will be the first thing, because in a list, the first thing in a list is always the function name. Right? So the method name is put first, but there's a dot in front of it to indicate that it's a Java method. And then after the instance of the class will be whatever parameters are there. And that's a very natural look for a list. If it's a static function, then you'll qualify the method name by putting in the name of the class and then a slash and then the name of the method, the static method. So system times no first. Yep.
This is based on Lisp, but I'm just thinking about how something like this works. This might be because I haven't used Lisp in a really long time, but just looking at that particular string, right, it would take dot method and apply it to class instance in part 1. And then it would then sort of apply that result with the second parameter. Does that mean that it ends up running that multiple times under?
No, that's not how it works.
Okay.
So this is a method that takes 2 parameters.
But when you're looking at classic Lisp, I just don't know about Clojure. But when you look at classic Lisp, it does like a tree, right? So if you had like plus 2, 4, 5, 6 or something, it would take plus 2 and 4, and then plus that to 5, and plus that to 6, or at least it branches it out. So just how does it work with that here when you have an odd number of, well, it's even parameters, but it's an odd number of parameters to the method, to the dot method.
So
atom.
in the Clojure interpreter or the Clojure compiler is just converting this to a straight Java call.
Okay, so
So
it's not, okay, so
There's none of that going on. I would encourage you to go out and play with it. I mean, it's a lot of fun, like I said. And, hopefully.
A philosophical question. I mean, you're right. I mean, Lisp has been around since all the time, right? Functional languages have been always sitting out there. Lots of advantages. They never caught on. Why do you think? What do you think is actually the stop? It's never been that it's ever taken over the world. Like what the functional guys want.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, everybody has theories about that. I mean, some people think it's the parentheses thing. I don't know if that's the case. The parentheses thing is like it's a very surface level issue. I mean, it's sort of like, I mean, there's nothing that really prevents, what everybody says about that's Clojure or any Lisp for a while is that after a while you don't even see the parentheses anymore. And that's really true. I mean, I don't even pay attention to it anymore. And I should say too that in an editor like Emacs, it's completely controlled for you. I mean, there's a mode called pair-edit mode in Emacs that completely takes over your parentheses. You don't even have to think about them anymore. You saw when I was copying and pasting throughout there. I mean, I can just copy with one keystroke, or I can cut a piece of code out with one keystroke, and it will know exactly where my parentheses are. It will pull out the proper things, and it's just completely seamless to me. I don't even notice the parentheses.
So if we assume it's not parentheses, but why still? I mean, it's why functional?
a lot of people, I don't know if it's even just functional, but I remember actually having this exact conversation. So when I did it back in college a long time ago, which is why I brought that up, everybody asked, so who understood what we did the past month? And there was like 2 people that really understood it, and I really liked Lisp, and everybody else was asking them for help. Because the idea of getting your brain to work in a prefix, I think for some people that's difficult, or postfix is difficult. It's not, like when you think about Ruby as a concept earlier, Ruby gained a lot of traction in Japan and here because people thought that it was more like speaking a natural language, and that sort of adjusted it. And when you think about how some brains work, Lisp at its base level works a little faster because it works, it's written the way a machine might think by saying, oh, you want me to do this to these. But we don't necessarily think that way. And I think that that's why, because people come up with functional languages, they tend to come up with things that hesitate to say it feels a little gimmicky, but it's neat. And so we like it. But when you go out there and you just have to build this massive thing, other than maybe Puppet themselves, who are like, yeah, Clojure, it gets in people's minds a little bit much. So it's like a super fun tool, but that's when they say, I don't know if I could apply that like in enterprise.
Yeah, for me, what Clojure and Lisps are they've boiled programming down to its essence, right? There's no artifice at all in a Lisp, right? There's nothing that is that's a cognitive load other than the thing that you're doing.
Low waste.
Yeah, I mean, everything is extremely simple. The first thing in the list is always the function name, and everything else is a parameter. I mean, that's the syntax. That's it. And that really appeals to me. The fact that I can have that is just, it's great.
What kind of problem do you think one should strive to use Clojure?
I would use for anything, but I'm biased. No, I mean, I guess functional type things, anything that you think is that are stereotypically functional, like multi-process kinds of things, where you can split things out into functional bits. And I guess those are the sorts of things they tell you to do. The idea behind immutability is very essential to functional programming too. And I think immutability is the most important thing to be in programming. I think it's more important than strong typing. I think it's more important than anything. I want data structures that won't change. makes programming so much easier. It makes thinking about your programming much easier. And
It makes
everyone
running in parallel.
and it makes it easier to do parallel things. Threading, lots of threading issues go away. Concurrency issues
It's
go
great
away.
for AI. It's really great for machine learning and stuff like that.
That's what they always said in the 70s, right?
Yeah, that's when there's symbolic
Still.
machines.
That's still a thing. I don't know. I think it's fun. I like it. I like doing it. I use it for anything.
Okay, so we have run past 9.
Sorry.
No, everybody keeps asking questions. Everybody's still enthralled. So can we make it one last question, or whatever? If there is one.
I'm done.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you, Steve. And a big thank you to our sponsors, Dub9 for Pizza, Disney for the facilities, and Dev9 for the video. Did I get them all? Anyway, we're grateful, and most of all, the presenters. Right? That's the best part. No. I mean, it was great to see 3 different development environments that were completely different from each other, right? And different ways of looking at problems too. So it's usually over at the Monaco, right?
Yeah, it says right. Yeah.
Sazerac, right. So for folks that want to continue on the Geek Speak, that's